tracing the practice across intelligence work, anthropology, and requirements engineering. The essay examines its theoretical foundations in the work of Michael Polanyi and others, surveys its principal methods, and confronts the challenges and ethical tensions that distinguish skilled elicitation from mere questioning. 1. Introduction. Ask an experienced emergency physician how she triages a crowded waiting room, and she will likely offer a tidy account of protocols and priority categories. Watch her work for an afternoon, and a different picture emerges. She is reading skin color, gait, the particular quality of a parent's anxiety, the silence of a child who should be crying. The gap between what she says she does and what she actually does is not dishonesty, it is the ordinary condition of expertise, and it is precisely the problem that elicitation exists to solve. Elicitation is the structured effort to surface knowledge that does not surrender itself to a simple question. It sits at the foundation of any enterprise that depends on understanding what people know, need, or do. Designing software, transferring institutional memory, formulating a policy, conducting research. Its central insight is deceptively simple and frequently ignored. People are unreliable narrators of their own expertise, not from bad faith, but because much of what they know operates below the level of conscious articulable thought. This essay treats elicitation as a coherent discipline with identifiable theoretical commitments, a varied methodological repertoire, and a distinctive set of practical and ethical challenges. 2. What elicitation is and is not. It is useful to begin by distinguishing elicitation from its neighbors. Ordinary questioning assumes that the answer exists, fully formed, in the respondent's mind and need only be requested. Interrogation, in the adversarial sense, assumes the respondent is concealing a known answer and must be pressured into yielding it. Elicitation assumes something more interesting, that the relevant knowledge may not yet exist in a statable form at all, and that part of the elicitor's job is to help bring it into being. 3 features mark genuine elicitation. First, it is constructive as well as extractive. The act of eliciting often helps the source articulate something they had never previously put into words. Second, it is methodologically deliberate, drawing on a repertoire of techniques chosen to fit the knowledge being sought and the person who holds it. Third, it is iterative and self-correcting, treating each account as provisional and subject to validation against other sources, observed behavior, and the source's own later reflection. The purposes elicitation serves follow from this. In requirements engineering, it discovers what stakeholders actually need, as opposed to what they first say they want. In knowledge management, it captures expertise before it walks out the door with a retiring specialist. In research and policy, it assembles a defensible picture of a complex reality from many partial and competing accounts. Across all of these, the recurring task is the same: to make explicit what was implicit and accessible what was hidden. 3. Historical development elicitation, as a self-conscious practice, has no single origin. It crystallized independently in several fields during the 20th century, before being recognized as a shared methodology. In anthropology, Bronisław Malinowski's fieldwork in the Trobriand Islands during the First World War established participant observation as a method premised on a now familiar suspicion that what informants say about their customs and what they do may diverge significantly, and that the ethnographer must attend to both Malinowski's insistence on prolonged immersion, on learning the local language, and on capturing the imponderabilia of actual life, prefigured the modern conviction that some knowledge can only be reached through sustained presence rather than direct inquiry. In intelligence work, the mid-century pressures of war drove the refinement of techniques for drawing information from human sources, including the subtle, non-coercive variety of elicitation in which a conversational partner reveals more than they intend through ordinary social reciprocity. This tradition contributed an enduring emphasis on rapport indirection, and the strategic sequencing of questions. In systems and software engineering, the recognition arrived more reluctantly. As systems grew complex in the 1970s and 1980s, practitioners discovered that the dominant cause of project failure was not faulty code, but faulty understanding of what the system was supposed to do. Frederick Brooks captured this in The Mythical Man Month, 1975, with his observation that the hardest single part of building a software system is deciding precisely what to build. Requirements engineering emerged as a distinct subfield, and elicitation became its acknowledged first and most error-prone phase. Treated at length in standard texts, such as Somerville and Catonia's work on requirements engineering, that these traditions converged on similar principles: rapport, triangulation. The primacy of observed over reported behavior is itself evidence that they were responding to a common underlying problem rather than a local idiosyncrasy of any one field. 4. Theoretical foundations. 4.1. The problem of tacit knowledge. The single most important idea underpinning elicitation comes from the philosopher and chemist Michael Polanyi, who argued in The Tacit Dimension, 1966, that we can know more than we can tell. Polanyi's example of recognizing a face among thousands without being able to specify how illustrates a general truth. Skilled performance rests on a substrate of knowledge that is real, reliable, and largely inarticulate: a radiologist reading a scan, a machinist judging a cut, a negotiator sensing the moment to concede. Each acts on knowledge that resists full verbal capture. This has a direct methodological consequence. If much expertise is tacit, then any elicitation strategy that relies solely on asking people to describe their knowledge will systematically miss the most valuable part of it. The tacit dimension is why observation, demonstration, and think-aloud protocols are not optional supplements to interviewing, but necessary correctives to its inherent blind spot. 4.2. The reconstructive nature of memory and report. A second foundation comes from cognitive psychology. Memory is not a recording, but a reconstruction, sensitive to the cues present at the moment of recall, and prone to systematic distortion. Nisbet and Wilson's influential 1977 paper, Telling More Than We Can Know, demonstrated that people frequently offer confident, plausible, and entirely incorrect accounts of why they behaved as they did, generating explanations from lay theories rather than genuine introspective access. For the elicitor, this is a sobering finding. A fluent and sincere explanation is not evidence of accuracy. It is why contextual cues, concrete scenarios, and the examination of real artifacts so reliably outperform abstract questioning. 4.3. The social production of information. Finally, elicitation is irreducibly social. Information is not extracted from a neutral repository. It is produced within a relationship, structured by trust, power, and interest. What a junior employee will tell an outside consultant differs from what they will tell their manager, which differs again from what they will reveal in an anonymous channel. The elicitor is never a passive recipient, but a participant whose identity, manner, and apparent purposes shape what becomes sayable. Recognizing this is what separates a competent elicitor from a credulous one. 5. The methodological repertoire. The techniques of elicitation can be organized by what they are best suited to reach. Interviews remain the workhorse, ranging from the structured, fixed questions, comparable answers, useful across many sources, through the semi-structured, a guiding frame with room to follow the unexpected, to the unstructured, broad themes, maximal latitude for the source. The semi-structured form is the practitioner's default, precisely because it balances coverage against the freedom to pursue the insight no one anticipated. A researcher studying clinical decision-making might begin with a standard question about diagnostic protocol, and then, hearing a physician mention a gut feeling about a patient, abandon the script to chase that intuition into the open. Observational methods, passive observation, participant observation, and think aloud protocols exist chiefly to reach the tacit knowledge that interviews cannot. Their canonical use is the demonstration. Rather than asking a loan officer how she assesses creditworthiness, the elicitor watches her work through a stack of real applications aloud, noting which cues she fixes on and which she ignores, surfacing a decision process she herself could not have described. Collaborative formats, such as facilitated requirements workshops, the joint application design tradition, and focus groups exploit group dynamics. Their distinctive value is twofold. They build consensus among stakeholders who must later agree, and they let participants' contributions trigger one another's recall, so that one person's remark unlocks a latent need in another. Artifact-based methods ground elicitation in something concrete. Prototyping is the most powerful. People who struggle to specify requirements in the abstract become articulate and exacting the moment they have a mock-up to criticize, because reaction is cognitively easier than generation. Document analysis of forms, procedures, logs, correspondence provides an objective check against self-report, and the gap between the documented process and the observed one is frequently where the most important findings lie. No serious elicitation relies on a single technique. The discipline's central methodological principle is triangulation, approaching the same knowledge from multiple methods and multiple sources, on the understanding that each has characteristic distortions, and that convergence across independent approaches is the best available proxy for truth. 6. Principles of practice. Good elicitation is procedurally disciplined across 3 phases. In preparation, the elicitor maps the stakeholders, acquires enough domain background to ask informed questions and recognize significant answers, and selects techniques to fit both the knowledge sought and the people who hold it. In execution, several principles recur. Rapport is built by demonstrating genuine respect for the source's expertise, by being transparent about purpose, and by opening with low-stakes questions before approaching sensitive ground. Active listening means attending not only to content but to hesitation, emphasis, and contradiction, and resisting the urge to interpret prematurely. Questioning should funnel from the open and exploratory, walk me through how you approach this, toward the specific and confirming. So if I understand correctly, you would, with probing requests for concrete examples deployed whenever an answer turns abstract. Documentation must distinguish carefully among verbatim quotation, paraphrase, and the elicitor's own inference, a discipline that prevents interpretation from silently hardening into supposed fact. In validation, the provisional accounts gathered are tested. Triangulation across sources exposes the difference between organizational fiction and operational reality. Member checking, returning findings to the source for correction, both improves accuracy and frequently provokes fresh insight. Translating verbal accounts into explicit models, such as process flows or state diagrams, is a particularly powerful validation device, because a diagram forces tacit assumptions into the open, where they can be confirmed or corrected. 7. Characteristic challenges. The difficulties of elicitation are not incidental obstacles but structural features of the work. The articulation of tacit knowledge is the foundational problem already discussed. Its remedy is to shift from description to demonstration, observing experts at work and prompting them to think aloud rather than to summarize. Incomplete and inaccurate report arises because sources forget, omit what they consider too obvious to mention, and reconstruct rather than recall. The countermeasures are repetition over time, methodological variety, and the persistent comparison of what people say against what they do. Stakeholder conflict and organizational politics mean that information is sometimes withheld or shaded to serve interests. Confidential individual sessions conducted alongside group workshops, an explicit focus on underlying needs rather than stated positions, and visibly neutral facilitation all help. The skilled elicitor treats divergence between sources, not as noise to be averaged away, but as data revealing the political structure of the situation. Communication barriers, jargon, differing conceptual frameworks, cultural assumptions about authority and directness are addressed by building shared vocabulary, using visual and concrete representations, and validating mutual understanding continuously rather than assuming it. 8. Adjacent disciplines, elicitation shares territory with several related practices, and the comparison sharpens its definition. Knowledge engineering applies elicitation specifically to encode expertise into computational systems, adding a demand for formalization that general elicitation lacks. User research in design overlaps heavily but centers on behavior and context, and is tightly coupled to iterative prototyping. Investigative journalism pursues hidden information too, but often within an adversarial relationship to sources, and under an ethical framework that subordinates source comfort to public interest. Market research scales elicitation toward the quantitative and the aggregate, trading depth of individual expertise for breadth of population pattern. What unites them is the underlying recognition that human knowledge does not transfer automatically. What distinguishes them is the purpose to which the recovered knowledge is put, and the relationship within which it is gathered. 9. Elicitation in practice. 2 illustrations. 2 cases show the stakes concretely. The first is Toyota's production system, which is often misremembered as a top-down engineering achievement. Its central innovations grew substantially from the systematic elicitation of frontline workers' knowledge. Engineers and managers spending sustained time on the factory floor, observing and questioning the people doing the work, and treating their tacit understanding of the process as a primary source of competitive advantage, rather than as noise to be standardized away. The andon cord empowering any worker to halt the line is, among other things, an elicitation mechanism, an institutionalized channel for surfacing the operator's real-time knowledge of when something is wrong. The second is a recurring pattern in clinical software. Development teams that elicit requirements only through interviews with administrators and physician leaders repeatedly produce systems that are technically faithful to documented procedure and unusable in practice, because the documented procedure is not the real one. Teams that supplement interviews with ethnographic observation of nurses and clinicians at work discover the undocumented workarounds, the interruptions, the improvised sequencing that constitute the actual workflow, and design for the reality rather than the fiction. The difference between the two approaches is the difference between asking and eliciting. 10. Ethical dimensions. Because elicitation operates on people and within relationships of unequal power, it carries genuine ethical weight. Sources are owed informed consent, a real understanding of how their words will be used, and a meaningful ability to decline. Promises of confidentiality and anonymity must be kept, particularly where candor could expose a source to professional risk. The power asymmetries embedded in organizational hierarchies must be recognized and mitigated, lest participation become coercion in another guise. The intellectual contribution of sources deserves acknowledgement rather than quiet appropriation, and techniques must be adapted to cultural norms around authority, directness, and what knowledge it is appropriate to share. These are not constraints external to good practice, but conditions of it. An elicitation that betrays its sources also corrupts its own data, since people who feel exploited stop telling the truth. 11. Conclusion. Elicitation earns its standing as a discipline because it answers a real and difficult question: how to recover knowledge that its holders cannot simply hand over. Its theoretical core, Polanyi's tacit dimension, the reconstructive fallibility of memory and self-report, the social production of all information, explains why naive questioning fails, and why the field's hard-won methods take the shape they do. Its repertoire of techniques, organized around the principle of triangulation, represents an accumulated response to the characteristic ways that human accounts mislead. The mark of expertise in elicitation is not procedural elegance, but consequence. Requirements that match real needs, expertise preserved across a generational handover, systems that serve the people who must actually use them, policy grounded in an honest picture of a complex world. In each case, the achievement is the same one Polanyi pointed to from the other direction. Where people know more than they can tell, elicitation is the practice of helping them tell more than they thought they could, and of knowing, all the while, which parts of the telling to trust.